You have been in therapy or something that functions like therapy, conversations with people you trust, journals filled with patterns you've identified, hours of reflection that have produced a vocabulary most people never develop. You know what your avoidant tendencies come from. You can trace the origin of your fear of conflict to a specific dynamic you grew up inside. You know why you self-sabotage in the particular ways you do, what wound the pattern is protecting, and what it would theoretically cost to change. And yet here you are, in the same pattern, again. Not because you're not smart enough to understand it, not because you haven't worked hard at this, but because you have arrived at the quiet, exhausting suspicion that understanding, which you have in significant quantity, is not the same thing as changing, that the map you've drawn of your interior life is accurate, and that having it has not moved you anywhere. This is not a failure of knowledge. This is a structural problem. And the reason it is a structural problem, not a personal one, not a moral one, not one that more understanding will eventually dissolve, is something that has never been stated to you directly, probably because the people who might say it are either too kind or have the same problem themselves. The enemy is not your lack of insight. The enemy is insight itself, specifically the function that insight has been quietly performing without your awareness. The function is this. When you can name a pattern clearly enough, the naming registers in the mind as action. The articulation substitutes for the change. And because articulation is significantly less costly than change, the substitution continues, and the pattern continues, and the understanding deepens, and nothing moves. You think you are someone who uses self-knowledge as a tool. You may actually be someone for whom self-knowledge has become the most sophisticated available reason that nothing has to change. There is a capacity that becomes available when this is visible, not the capacity to understand yourself more clearly, you already have that, but the capacity to notice when the act of articulating has replaced the act of doing anything with what you know, when explanation has become its own closure. That gap between naming and moving is where the actual work is, and right now the name is standing between you and it. The thing you have been doing and have not had precise language for is this. You explain yourself to a friend, to someone who asks how you're doing, to a therapist or internally with such accuracy and such evident self-compassion that by the end of the explanation, the person listening, including yourself, feels that something has been addressed. The explanation is correct. The compassion is genuine. The self-knowledge on display is real. And the effect is that nothing needs to change because the quality of the understanding has already satisfied the requirement for having engaged with the problem. You have done the work. The work was the explaining. If this channel is naming things you haven't found named elsewhere, subscribe. That's how it reaches the people who need it. The explaining, its precision, its genuine compassion, its accuracy, has a history of being mistaken for something it is not, and understanding that history requires going somewhere that self-help has never taken this idea. Hannah Arendt did not write about therapy. She was not interested in the psychology of the individual in the clinical sense. She was a political philosopher, and the problem she was working on was one of the most extreme that the 20th century produced: how ordinary people participated in mass atrocity without apparent psychological disruption, without guilt that reached the surface, without breaking. The explanation she arrived at, what she called the banality of evil, was not that these people lacked conscience or were secretly monstrous. It was that they had stopped thinking. Not that they were unintelligent, many were not, but that they had substituted the performance of a role for the exercise of genuine moral reflection. The cognitive apparatus of thought was present. The function of thought, its capacity to interrupt, to question, to make contact with the reality of what was being done, was absent. The most important thing Arendt said about this, and the thing that carries directly into the territory of personal psychology, is that thought and action belong to categorically different realms. Thinking is not doing. The activity of the mind reflecting on a situation is not the same order of activity as the will intervening in the situation. And the confusion of the two, the treatment of a particular quality of thinking as equivalent to action, is precisely how people can be deeply engaged with ideas about their own situation while the situation itself goes entirely uninterrupted. You have not committed any atrocity. The structural parallel is not a moral one. But what Arendt identified, the substitution of the apparatus of reflection for the function of intervention, is exactly what happens in the mind of the highly self-aware person who has understood their patterns completely and changed none of them. The thinking has happened. The action has not. And the thinking is, in some functional sense, what allows the non-action to continue, because the thinking satisfies the internal observer that something is being done. This is the application that most people doing this kind of introspective work prefer not to examine, because it implies that the very thing you have invested in most, your capacity to understand yourself, may be the primary mechanism by which you are insulated from the thing that understanding is supposed to produce. William James, writing on how the mind economizes, described a tendency of the mental apparatus to accept a cognitively satisfying representation of a situation as equivalent to the situation itself. He was not writing about psychotherapy. He was writing about the mechanics of attention and habit, how the mind learns to treat the map as the territory when the map is good enough. What this means in practice is that a sufficiently accurate model of your own behavior can begin to function as a substitute for engagement with the actual behavior. The model is sophisticated, the model is correct, and the model is standing between you and the thing it is a model of, absorbing the energy that might otherwise reach the original. This is why willpower has almost nothing to do with it. Willpower addresses the moment of action directly. The person who has replaced action with a very sophisticated model of the action is not facing a willpower problem. They are facing a substitution problem. And willpower is the wrong instrument, the brutal version of this and the one worth sitting with. The more articulate your self-understanding, the more efficiently it can perform the substitution. The person who understands their avoidance incompletely is at least still in friction with it. There is a quality of unresolved discomfort that remains active, that has not been absorbed into a narrative, that can still generate urgency. You have resolved the discomfort through understanding, which means the urgency is gone, the driver of change is gone. And the pattern runs without resistance, in the comfortable company of a very accurate description of itself. Dostoevsky built an entire character around this. The underground man is the most self-aware narrator in the literature of that period. He is not deluded. He does not lack intelligence. He sees his contradictions with extraordinary clarity. He names his resentments, anticipates objections to his own behavior, answers them before the reader can raise them, explains himself with a fluency that is almost suffocating to read. And then, in the famous scene in which he humiliates the prostitute Liza, a person who has come to him with something genuine, something that requires him to be actually present, he cannot do it. He does everything wrong, and he knows he is doing it wrong, and the knowing does not stop him. Afterward, he explains it accurately, with the same exhausting fluency. And Dostoevsky does not forgive him for this. The self-knowledge is not exculpatory. It is the instrument through which the underground man's patterns are maintained at a level of sophistication that makes them invulnerable to cruder forms of challenge. Every challenge has already been absorbed and answered. The system is sealed. The self-knowledge is the seal. You know this from the inside. You have probably sat in a session, a conversation, a moment of genuine confrontation with yourself, and felt the slightly hollow quality of knowing what is about to be said before it is said. You know which pattern is about to be named. You know which origin story applies. You know what the compassionate interpretation is. And knowing all of this in advance means that when the thing is said, there is nothing for it to land on. The preparation has also been a kind of inoculation. The insight arrives pre-digested. It produces a nod of recognition rather than a moment of contact. And then the session ends, and the pattern is intact. Erich Fromm described a specific failure mode in psychoanalytic work in which the patient develops genuine intellectual understanding of their own dynamics and uses that understanding to remain exactly where they were. He distinguished between knowledge that stands apart from life and observes it, retrospective, verbal, articulable, safe to hold in the abstract, and what he called living knowledge, meaning knowledge that is present and operative at the moment the pattern is running. Not knowledge about the pattern, knowledge inside the pattern as it unfolds, with the capacity to interrupt it while it is still happening. Most self-understanding is of the first kind. It happens after. You have the avoidant response. You withdraw, or you don't say the thing, or you engineer the situation to avoid the confrontation. And then afterward, sometimes immediately, sometimes days later, you understand what happened. You trace it accurately. You feel the appropriate self-compassion. And none of this reaches into the moment when the avoidance was running, because the moment is over. The pattern ran. It got what it came for. Your understanding of it afterward is noted and filed and added to the map. Fromm's point, and this is the part that the therapeutic tradition has largely avoided stating plainly, is that retrospective understanding and living knowledge are not on a continuum. They are not the same thing at different stages of development. They are different in kind. You cannot accumulate enough understanding after to produce presence during. The mechanisms are not connected in that way. More therapy, more accuracy, more of the good work you have been doing, more of the same kind of knowing produces more of the same kind of knowing. The gap remains exactly where it was. Marcus Aurelius did not believe in the primacy of understanding over practice. His meditations are frequently cited as evidence of Stoic self-knowledge, and they are. But what is rarely observed about them is that he was not recording what he had already understood. He was doing something in real time on the page, practicing, confronting, rehearsing, redirecting, holding himself to a standard in the act of writing, rather than reflecting on a standard he had achieved somewhere else. The self-knowledge in the meditations is not retrospective. It is operational. It is knowledge in active contact with behavior as behavior is occurring, not knowledge standing apart from behavior and describing it accurately from a safe distance. This implies something the person who has accumulated years of accurate self-knowledge does not want to hear. That what Marcus Aurelius was doing, the quality of attention, the proximity to the actual moment of experience, is more constitutive of transformation than anything you currently have more of. And you cannot produce it through more of the kind of work you have already done. You would have to do something genuinely different, not better understanding, a different relationship to the understanding you already have. Epictetus identified what is actually in your power, and he would be correct and uncomfortable to say that what is in your power is not the pattern. The pattern runs with or without your understanding of it, because it was formed before you had the vocabulary to name it, and it runs below the speed at which reflection can intercept it. What is in your power is smaller than that. What you do at the specific moment when the pattern is active, before the retrospective account has arrived, before the compassionate narrative is available to absorb the event. That moment is narrow. It is faster than language. It does not wait for you to remember what you know about yourself. And every reflective capacity you have, every accurate insight, every articulable understanding, none of it is present in that moment in the form you would need it to be, because you built all of it in the slow time of reflection, and the moment does not operate in slow time. This is what your self-knowledge cannot give you. Not because you haven't earned it, not because the work was wrong or the understanding is false, because the giving and the receiving happen in registers that do not connect in the way you have assumed they do. What is required is something that feels less like understanding and more like exposure. Not exposure to new information about yourself. You have enough of that. Exposure to the pattern as it is running, without the retrospective account yet available to absorb the event into a story, which means tolerating a form of discomfort, a raw pre-linguistic quality of contact with the thing you have been explaining, that your intelligence has been very effectively managing. The understanding is not wrong. It was never wrong. But it has been recruited, and what it has been recruited into the service of is not your transformation. It is your coherence. The maintenance of a self that is legible to itself, accurate about itself, compassionate toward itself. And precisely because of that legibility, that accuracy, that compassion, sealed. Not more broken than you thought, more protected than you knew. You don't need to understand yourself better. You need to be less comfortable with what you already know.